Welcome to part 2 of chapter 1, the nature of development. The topics in this section are biological, cognitive, and social-emotional processes interact as individuals develop, and the process shapes development. We will talk about that shortly. Then we'll look at periods of development, the significance of age, and a few major developmental issues, such as nature and nurture. So let's begin with the biological, cognitive, and social-emotional processes. Biological processes, these represent changes in an individual's physical nature. Science now allows for the study of the individual's genetic makeup, so we can get all the way down to look at the difference in genes from one person to another and see how they affect the biology of the person. So anything biological, this would include hormone levels and aspects of going through puberty and brain functioning, the endocrine system, and things like that, all would fall under biology. Just basic growth we will, of course, look at. Cognitive processes, changes in an individual's thought, intelligence, and language. This includes the study of memory, for instance, as well as things like problem solving and decision making. Social emotional processes, changes in an individual's relationships, emotions, and personality. So this would include topics like friendships and romances, just relationship between parents and children, and peer group functioning and things like that. Okay. One thing to keep in mind, and you've been asked about this in the discussion board, is keep in mind that these three different processes interact, as you can see in this picture here. They overlap one another. So when there are changes in one of these processes, then it will often affect one or both of the other types of processes. And, if the change is major enough, it certainly will in one respect or another. And so try to think of examples of how, throughout development, something changes in one of these areas and affects the other areas. I'll give you one. Try not to use this one in your discussion board, but because there's so many others to choose from. But okay, as our brains physically mature during childhood, it's the maturation of the brain, the physical maturation of the brain, it leads to us thinking differently. So the biological change leads to cognitive changes. We start to think about ourselves differently. We start to think about others differently. We gain language skills. And as we go through those cognitive changes, thinking about ourselves and others differently and gaining language skills, it's certainly going to affect our social emotional processes. It's going to affect our relationships with others as our language advances and as we think about and understand others better. And so it'll affect our peer groups and our friendships and our relationships within our family. And anyway, so that's one simple example. The brain matures, it affects your thinking, and then your thinking affects your thinking, and your language will affect your relationships. And so there are all sorts of different examples you can choose from, and that is one of the questions I've asked on the discussion board. Let's go on. Biological processes are, processes are bidirectional and intertwined. The connection across biological, cognitive, and social emotional processes is really obvious in these two rapidly emerging fields that they mention here. Developmental cognitive neuroscience, it looks at the links between development your cognition and specifically the brain. And then there's developmental social neuroscience. It looks at connections between social emotional processes, development in the brain. These are new areas of study that have come forth, to examine linkages between how you develop and how it affects your brain and how it affects your cognition or your social emotional processes. Okay, and so both fields show that their influence on each other is a constant. Let's go to periods of development. There are 8 periods of development shown here. There's one more we're gonna talk about and add. I don't see if you can figure it out. Pause the video. Which period do you know of that's missing? It's the newest period that's been added to the list. So it didn't make it to this diagram. But anyways, let's take a look at 8 periods, actually 9 periods, including the new one. We got the nice pictures here, but I'm going to go to the next slide and talk about them here. And the 9 periods, because we've added the missing one in here, are as follows. The prenatal period is from conception to birth. We will talk about that because there's certainly developmental issues that go on during that period. Then we have infancy. It says birth to 18 to 24 months. I tell you what I'll be referencing. I mean, when I say infants, I'm usually going to be talking about the first year of life, 0 to 1. And I'm specifically going to refer to the second year from 1 to 2 as toddlers and toddlerhood. Right? So I'm going to say this whole period is from 0 to 2. And it's split up into infancy and toddlerhood. Then we have early childhood from 3 to 5. These are also known as the preschool years. So sometimes I will just say the preschoolers, rather than saying early childhood. And you'll know I mean the 3 to 5 age category. During this age category, children become self-sufficient. It's one of the huge tasks. They start to learn how to feed themselves and put their own clothes on and kind of care for themselves in many ways. And it's school readiness is also very important in early childhood. They start getting prepared for school, learning some basic, lettering, like how to write their name or how to recognize it at least, and things like that. So basic number learning goes on. Then we have middle and late childhood from 6 till about 10 or 11. I will often refer to this period as the elementary school years. We next have adolescence from, somewhere around 10 to 12 up to about 18 to 21. The ages are a little fuzzy around the adolescence period because it doesn't start at one specific age. It starts with puberty. And that will vary from one individual to another. And when it ends is also debatable. Adolescence ends a little earlier for some and a little later for others because the transition out of adolescence is not, once again, it's not set to one specific age. The period that's been added, the newest period, is called emerging adulthood. We're defining that as 18 to 25. Anyone? I might ask you a question, even though none of you can answer. But anyone know why this period was added? I mean, if you go back, I don't know, probably just, you don't have to go back too long, but maybe a textbook from 10 years ago, you probably won't find it. Or maybe a little bit longer than that, but it's only been around probably the last 10 years. The reason why we've created a new period after years and years and years of having 8 periods is that society has changed, and this period kind of just sprang to life without anyone defining it. And finally somebody said, this seems to be a new period. And what happened was that we used to transition from adolescence to adulthood. And back in, I'll talk sometimes about back in my day. I'm in my 50s now, so it's when I was an adolescent, and it was very common that you were expected to really be out of your parents' home by the time you reached 20. Um, it's kind of the end of your teenage years. It was seen as unusual to still be at home past the age of at 20 or later. It's not unusual anymore, is it? I mean, lots of young 20-year-olds are living at home still. What changed was the economics of society. Back in my day, okay, back in my day, I mean, there were jobs aplenty, and so you could be pushed out of the family home because it was not a problem to become self-sufficient. If you were willing to work, you could find a job at a factory somewhere. And or for me, I found assembly line jobs that paid very well. And they every I remember every summer I'd look in the pay in the newspaper and find one type of factory job or another, and as long as I had a set of work boots, and they would hire me. And it was just a time where you didn't there was a lot of unskilled labor needed. And so anyone could be expected back then to live on their own and find enough work to pay for themselves. It's not like that anymore. So many of those jobs have just disappeared. Two major reasons. One is automation. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but machines do the work of humans in many industries now. So we need far less people in those industries. And then outsourcing. A lot of jobs did go overseas. And so that whole pool of jobs that people were taking to start out, after high school, to start out their careers. Back then, a lot less people went to college than today. So a lot of people would just leave high school at the end and go and start working. And that just isn't available to the same extent anymore. So with the new economics, we have a lot more people that, first of all, going to college, but we also have a lot more people living at home well into their 20s, because it makes economic sense to save up money, and then eventually, maybe in your mid 20s, or you can go off on your own. You have enough money, and still people are in debt at that point. So the economics changed, and so it kind of like grew that there was that people had more time to find their path in life, to find their career path, to find what work they were going to do. And society became very um, I'm not sure the word here. Uh, Society allowed people to take their time. No parents no longer push their kids out of the home just because they're into their 20s. I mean, we all know that it's that most people can't support themselves at that age. And so this new period grew, that after adolescence there was a period of kind of it's a period of getting kind of getting some firm footing in the world before you're expected to be self-sufficient, saving up some money, working on your career by going to college. Far greater numbers of people go to college because it's expected for so many jobs now. And so there is less rush to become an adult. And so people are entering adulthood later. And this new period emerged. Okay, anyways, I've probably said too much already about it, but we will talk. It'll come up again later in the book. Then we have three adulthood categories. Early adulthood, we're basically going to say the 20s and 30s, and I know there's some overlap there between with the emerging adulthood, but that's okay. Early adulthood, 20s and 30s. Middle adulthood, 40s and 50s. Late adulthood, 60s to 70s to death. And these are the age categories we will be studying. The age periods that we'll be studying during this course. Okay, let's go on. There are 3 developmental patterns of aging. Normal aging is just what most people, um, how most people age, what kind of the average person goes through as they age. Um, your psychological function peaks in early middle age, and then it starts to decline. Pathological aging is a negative form of aging. Um, you have above average decline in early old age, developing a condition leading to mild cognitive impairment. So pathological aging might be somebody that develops dementia due to having Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. Successful aging is it describes somebody that's maintaining their function longer than typical. Um, Usually because they're continuing to exercise and use their minds, and have social networks, and so I don't know. An example might be like an 80-year-old who can walk about without any problems, without a cane, and and it still looks like he could go hiking. Um, okay, and that would be considered successful aging. Um, I'm just gonna skip this. So, you can read more about this in the book. There's different ways to look at age. Besides those 3 patterns of aging, chronological age is the most common way. Just how old you are. That means biological age is your age in terms of biological health. So this is judging you by your body and the health of your body, the health of your mind, and the younger the person's biological age, the longer they are expected to live, regardless of their chronological age. So you could have a 50-year-old with a biological age of 60 because he smokes and drinks and is overweight, and then you could have a 60-year-old that has a biological age of 50 because he's very healthy, and so the 60-year-old is expected to live longer than the 50-year-old because his biological age is younger. So biological age is kind of what determines really how long you're expected to live. Psychological age, it refers to the individual's adaptive capacities compared with people of the same chronological age. Uh, so adaptive capacities, I mean, this is kind of like what age do you think at? Um, what are your problem solving skills, for instance? Some people are just much better at adapting to circumstances, to new situations, and um, new situations, new environments is what I was going to say. And just because they're sharp and they have very good decision making and problem solving skills, and so that's kind of what psychological age is looking at. It's like your adaptive capacities. Can you handle obstacles and problems that are thrown your way? Are you somebody that is a little bit is suffering some kind of cognitive decline, as you age, and if so, then you would have an older psychological age. So it's it's just kind of comparing people of the same age, and some are much more adaptive than others, and that's with the psychological age. And also, yeah, I guess really one of the things I should mention is, that works into this is things like mental illness and mental disorders. Your psychological age is somewhat lower if you're depressed, certainly, if you have anxiety disorders, or you're bipolar, or if you have schizophrenia, your psychological age goes way down. Um, so that would have certainly affected it. So if you're mentally healthy, you're more adaptive to new situations. Social age is kind of like how old do you act, when you socialize. So if there's a grandmother that goes dancing every night and likes to go out on the town, I mean, like her social age would be, and when I say grandma, let's say somebody in their 70s and they go out dancing still. I mean, like that means that they have a younger social age than is typical for their biological age. So it's kind of like, how old do you act? What kind of activities and socializing do you do? Okay, let's go on. I was talking about older people there, but you could social age. You could also look at children, and like sometimes you might have like an 8-year-old that still plays with 5-year-olds a lot, and maybe he has a much younger social age than his 8 chronological years, and he still enjoys like playing, kid games with 5-year-olds. So I mean, it's not just as we age, but at any age you can look at these different conceptions of aging. Okay, developmental issues. We are going to look at 3 issues here, and the first one is nature nurture. I also asked about this in the discussion board, and I don't like that they still use the word debate here. It's been pretty well established that it's not really a debate anymore. But anyways, debate about whether development is primarily influenced by nature or nurture. I mean, when I say it's not really a debate anymore, we know that they are intertwined with one another. You can't even have one without the other. I mean, they are constantly affecting each other. So to try to debate that our development is primarily influenced by one or the other is very hard to do. It'd be like saying, what's more important. I'm just making this up as I go. Or what's more important on a bicycle? Is it the wheels or the metal frame? I mean, it's that kind of issue. It's like, well, you really need both. Like, it's not a bicycle if you only have one or the other. You can't say one's more important. And that's kind of this issue as well. This is why most people don't refer to it as a debate anymore. It was a debate for many hundreds of years. I mean, it was debated by Plato and Socrates about what makes a person. Is it their the parents that they come from, or is it how they're raised and in society, and they were debating this issue back in philosophical times. They debated it in philosophical writings in the 1600s and 1700s. People like Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote about this, and so anyways, it has a long history of debate. Some people saying that we are a product of our genes, and that's most important. Other people saying that it's certainly our upbringing and an environment that determines who we are. Even into the 1900s, John B. Watson, who started behaviorism, was a firm believer that you could take any infant, it doesn't matter what their genes are, and you could turn them into anything based on giving them the right environment and the right nurture, that basically their genes didn't make any difference at all. So I mean, even into the 1900s, it was being debated, but now in modern times, once again, it's not really a debate because they both have to exist. They both constantly influence each other. But there is still, I will say that there is still some debate. There is some debate about, I guess, which one's most important. And that's what I ask you on the discussion board. So even though we know that they both are needed and they both interact, and you can't say it's one or the other, but you could say one's somewhat more important if you want. Okay, and so I probably already ruined the discussion board question. Okay, so I'm not going to say much more about except once again, nature is your genetic inheritance. So all the things that any ways that my genes affect me is my nature. Anything to do with my upbringing and my any environmental variables, that's my nurture. the particular neighborhood I live in, which country I grew up in. When I was talking about contexts of development in the first video, and those are all nurture variables, your family that you're in, the community you grew up in, the school you go to. So anyways, that's the nature nurture issue, as most people call it now. The second issue is the stability change issue. There's some debate about the degree to which an individual becomes an older version of the early self with the same traits persisting throughout life, or do they develop into someone different from who they were at an earlier point in development? This is stability versus change. Are we stable? Does heredity, our genes and our early experiences in life determine who we are? That's one kind of side of the issue that people like Freud kind of supported that the earliest years of your life were the most critical, and they really determined your personality and who you were going to be in life. And later experiences were much less important because it was kind of like your brain's already set now. And so I will tell you that people that believe in stability, that we kind of continue along the same kind of trajectory, that once certain things are determined, that you're never really going to veer off that path. You're going to have a certain personality established early in life, and it will always be with you. People that believe in that side tend to believe in nature. That makes sense, right? Because they're saying your genetics are kind of the starting point, and they have a huge impact. People that believe in change, and the way that argument is presented is that later experiences are just as important as early ones. And so change can happen at any age. No matter what you were like as a child, you could make a 90-degree turn and become somebody different in adolescence, and you can completely change your life around in different ways, and you're not tied to your past. That's the change issue in this versus stability. So people that believe in change, they believe nurture is really important, obviously, because nurture is all the experiences you have in life, all the environments and experiences you have. So, maybe something important happens to me when I'm 12 and my life changes dramatically. And so I become a different person than I was as a child, because of the influence of that nurture event, that environmental event. Okay. So that's stability change. The third issue is continuity, discontinuity. This is the debate about the extent to which development involves gradual cumulative change or distinct stages. So on the continuity side is that you develop incrementally, a little bit at a time. So, my cognition, maybe each year of childhood, I become a little bit smarter than I was last year. And, there aren't any radical shifts in my thinking. I learn more each year, and so my cognition improves. Whereas another person might say, no, it's more discontinuous development. You don't just, gain a certain amount of intelligence each year and extra knowledge each year. You actually shift the way you think from one form of thinking to a completely different one. This would be like Piaget's theory, which we'll look at in the fourth video. He says that there are stages of cognitive development where you shift from one way of thinking about the world and one way of thinking, at all, to a completely different way of thinking. So it's not just like you're incrementally improving, you shift. And so in nature, just to give you examples, continuity would be like the growth of a tree. If you look at a small tree, it looks like a small tree. I mean, it's got the same kind of structure as a larger tree. I mean, it's just the branches get thicker, the trunk, the tree goes upwards. It gets more branches, they get thicker, it gets more leaves. But I mean, it still looks like a tree, whether it's a young tree or an old tree. It just kind of grows each year. That's continuity. The form never really changes. Discontinuity is the tadpole to the frog, for instance. They don't even look like they should be the same, in the same family. They don't look like they're related. It doesn't look like a tadpole is anything, has any chance to become a frog, but it does. I mean, or the what becomes a butterfly? A moth? No, not a moth. Sorry, caterpillar. I guess it's a caterpillar. Caterpillar to a butterfly. I don't know where I got moth. Okay, caterpillar to butterfly. I mean, like, that is a discontinuous change. It didn't become more caterpillar. It didn't become just a bigger caterpillar. It sprouted wings. I mean, oh my goodness, it's a radical shift. So what we'll find is that certain aspects of development show shifts like that. So we call that like stage-like development. It's like you go from one stage to another, and versus other things, like if you look at the elementary school years, an elementary school child gains about the same number of inches in growth every year, and their weight is pretty constant. There's exceptions, but the average child is like certain number of inches, certain number of pounds year after year, all through elementary school. And then, so that seems like continuous growth, physical growth. And then all of a sudden they hit puberty and it's discontinuous. It's like all of a sudden it becomes radically different. They go sprouting up. So when we look at issues, sometimes it's the time period you look at will determine whether it's more continuous or discontinuous, and which particular issues you look at. So there's not one right answer. Okay, those are the three major issues: nature, nurture, stability, change, continuity, discontinuity. Most developmentalists acknowledge that development is a combination of each of these views. Once again, I don't think any of them is really that much of a debate anymore. Like, it's not, as far as it being one or the other. Everyone accepts that there's both continuous and discontinuous growth. There's both nature and nurture influence, and there's both stability for some things and change for other things that go on in development. Okay, and I guess the debate now is just the extent. How much is one more responsible than the other? And this, I guess that's a worthwhile debate. I mean, like, they study things like, how much is your intelligence due to your environment versus your genetics? And it turns out the answer is somewhere around 50-50 in the case of intelligence. It's pretty much equal. They can't put an exact number on it, but you kind of get equal weighting of your upbringing as well as your genetics for intelligence. Other things are weighted one way or the other more. Okay, and that concludes video 2, the nature of development.